Okay, so we all know the big names, right? Julius Caesar, Pompey, Crassus, the guys who tore the Roman Republic apart. But here's the thing, that's the end of the story. What we're going to do is rewind. We're going back a whole century before Caesar even shows up on the scene. We're going to look at this period of just escalating crisis, one thing after another, that basically made the whole collapse a sure thing. This, right here, is the story of the storm before the storm.
I love this quote from Mike Duncan. It really nails it. A raging fire naturally commands attention, but to prevent future fires, one must ask how the fire started. So to really get why the Republic fell, we can't just, stare at the huge bonfire that was Caesar's civil war. That's the exciting part for sure. But we've got to look at the fuel, all the gasoline that was getting poured on this political tinderbox for 100 years before he ever lit the match. You see, the cracks in the foundation, they were there for a long, long time before the walls finally came crashing down.
All right, so where do we begin? Let's set the scene. The year is 1406 BC, and this year, man, this should have been Rome's absolute greatest moment. I mean, this is the peak. This is the year the Roman Republic hit the absolute top of its game, becoming the one and only, the unquestioned master of the entire Mediterranean.
So get this, in just 1 year, Rome pulled off something that was just unthinkable. You have one army, way down in North Africa, finally breaking through the walls of their greatest enemy, Carthage, and just burning it to the ground. Gone. And at the exact same time, hundreds of miles away to the east, a different Roman army is sacking the famous Greek city of Corinth, basically snuffing out the last little bit of Greek freedom. I mean, can you imagine? In the span of months, Rome just eliminated its rivals. They were the only superpower left standing. The whole game had changed. But here's the twist. This huge, epic victory, it actually revealed this deep, rotting problem at the very heart of the Republic. See, all this conquering brought in an insane amount of wealth, just unimaginable riches. But where did it all go? Well, it sure didn't go to everyone. It got funneled straight into the pockets of the rich, the aristocracy. And what did they do with it? They bought up enormous chunks of land and worked them with massive gangs of slaves. And this had a devastating effect. It pushed the small citizen farmer, the guy who was the absolute backbone of the Roman army, right off his land and into the city, broke and jobless. And just like that, you have a massive, massive social crisis brewing.
So you have this pressure cooker of a situation, right? And eventually, something's got to give. This internal rot finally boiled over when one guy, a revolutionary reformer, showed up on the scene. His name was Tiberius Gracchus, and his big idea to solve this land crisis, well, it was going to end up introducing political murder right into the heart of Roman politics for the very first time.
Okay, so to understand what Tiberius was trying to do, you need to know about this thing called ager publicus. Basically, it just means public land. So as Rome conquered all of Italy, a lot of that new land became property of the state. And there was a law, a really old law, that said no single family could lease more than a certain amount, about 300 acres. But here's the thing, that law was a joke. For generations, the wealthy elite had just been ignoring it, gobbling up huge estates of this public land and treating it like it was their own private backyard.
So Tiberius Gracchus gets elected as tribune of the plebes. That's a position meant to protect the common people. And he decides he's going to fix this mess. He puts forward a law, the Lex Agraria, to enforce those old land limits and give the extra land back to the poor. Well, you can imagine how that went over with the Senate, which was full of the exact guys who were illegally squatting on that land. They blocked him at every turn. So Tiberius decided, okay, two can play at that game. He started breaking rules, big ones. He went around the Senate and took his bill straight to the People's Assembly. When another tribune, a guy on the Senate's payroll, vetoed his bill, Tiberius did something no one had ever done. He had the people vote to kick him out of office. He was just shattering one political tradition after another, basically throwing the whole rulebook out the window.
And this is where it all just explodes. During the election, when Tiberius was trying to run for a second term, another broken rule, by the way, a mob of furious senators and their hangers-on, led by the Pontifex Maximus, the high priest of Rome himself, they stormed the assembly. And this wasn't a debate. They grabbed whatever they could find, literally ripping the legs off wooden benches, and they beat Tiberius Gracchus and about 300 of his supporters to death. Right there in the open. This was it. This was the moment everything changed. For the very first time, political arguments in Rome weren't being settled with votes anymore. They were being settled with clubs and murder. A terrible, terrible line had been crossed.
So, Tiberius Gracchus was dead, but the problems he died trying to solve, they weren't going anywhere. In fact, they just got worse. They festered, and they ended up creating this huge military crisis. And this crisis opened the door for another ambitious outsider to step in and completely change the most important institution in Rome, the army. And that outsider's name was Gaius Marius. Now, Marius was what the Romans called a novus homo, a new man. That's a fancy way of saying he wasn't part of the in crowd. He didn't come from one of those old, snooty noble families that had been running the show for centuries. He was talented, he was super ambitious, and the old guard, they couldn't stand him. But lucky for him, Rome had a big problem. They were fighting new wars, and they were seriously struggling to find enough soldiers.
So what Marius did next was kind of simple, but it would absolutely doom the Republic. To solve his manpower problem, he just did away with the old rule that said you had to own property to be in the army. He started recruiting from the massive pool of poor, landless citizens in the cities, and just like that, he turned the army from a part-time citizen militia into a full-time professional force. But here's the critical part. Who were these new soldiers loyal to? Not some abstract idea of the Senate and people of Rome. No way. Their loyalty was to their general, to Marius, the guy who paid their salary, led them to glory, and, this is the most important part, promised them a nice plot of land when they retired. The Roman army didn't belong to the Republic anymore. It now belonged to whoever was leading it.
So now you've got this new kind of army, an army that's loyal to a man, not the state. You can see where this is going, right? It was basically a loaded gun, pointed right at the heart of the Republic, and it was just sitting there, waiting for someone to come along and pull the trigger. Well, that man turned out to be Marius's biggest rival, a guy named Lucius Cornelius Sulla.
So let me ask you a question. For hundreds of years, the whole Roman system depended on one single, sacred, unbreakable rule to keep its own powerful generals in check. What was the one thing, the ultimate taboo, that a Roman commander could never, ever do? Simple. You never, ever march your army on Rome. The city had a sacred boundary called the pomerium, and it was an absolute law that no Roman army under arms was ever allowed to cross that line. I mean, to do that, that wasn't just breaking a rule. That was an act of treason. It was a declaration of war against your own country. And then, in 88 BC, Lucius Cornelius Sulla did it. He actually did it. He got into a political beef with Marius over who was going to get a rich command in a war out east, and instead of arguing in the Senate, Sulla just turned his army around, marched it right up to the gates of Rome, and took the city by force. Just like that. The ultimate taboo shattered. The loaded gun had just been fired.
Now, after Sulla marched on Rome and took over, he wasn't just satisfied with winning a political fight. Oh no. He set out to completely remake the Roman state in his own image. And in the process, he basically created the final blueprint for how to destroy the Republic for good. He introduced this absolutely terrifying new tool called proscription. Here's how it worked. He'd just post lists of his political enemies up in the forum. If your name was on that list, you were a dead man walking. Anyone could legally hunt you down and kill you, and they'd get a cash reward for it. And what happened to your stuff, your house, your lands? All confiscated by the state. And wouldn't you know it, it often ended up in the pockets of Sulla and his buddies. It was nothing less than a state-sponsored reign of terror, and it wiped out an entire generation of his enemy.
And then Sulla went even further. He had himself declared dictator, but not the old kind who served for 6 months in an emergency. No, this was a new flavor, dictator with no term limit. His excuse? He had to break the Republic in order to save it. And from his point of view, maybe he even believed it. He was trying to pull off a conservative revolution, beef up the Senate, strip the power from those populist tribunes, and basically turn back the clock to a time when the aristocracy ran everything, no questions asked.
But the reality? It was a total catastrophe. Pretty much all of his so-called reforms fell apart within 10 years of his death. So what was his real legacy? It wasn't saving the Republic. It was leaving behind a perfect, step-by-step guide on how to destroy it. He proved, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that a powerful general with a loyal army could march on Rome, kill all his enemies, and rule as an absolute dictator. He created the playbook. The only thing left was for the next generation to come along and run his plays even better.
Sulla probably thought he was some great restorer, a man bringing back the good old days. But all he really did was create the future. He lit up the path to one-man rule for everyone to see. He left behind a republic that was, it was a hollowed-out shell. It was traumatized, broken, and just waiting for the next ambitious general to follow in his footsteps. The stage was now perfectly set for the big names we all know: Pompey, Crassus, Caesar. Sulla had provided the blueprint. The only question left was who would be next.